I signed the papers on a Thursday. That's the part people never believe when I tell the story. They expect me to say I threw them across the patio or walked out cursing or at least knocked over a glass. But no, I sat there in the evening heat with the lake turning copper behind me, and I signed every single page. Clean strokes, no hesitation, not a single correction mark. Diane stood over me the whole time like she thought her shadow had legal authority. One hand on her hip, the other wrapped around a glass of my Macallan 18, the bottle I'd been saving for our 20th anniversary, the one we were never going to make it to, as it turned out. She wore the silk robe I bought her last Christmas, the one she'd thanked me for, with tears that I now understood were about as genuine as a car salesman's handshake. And around her neck was a necklace I had never seen before. Small, gold, understated. The kind of thing a man picks out when he wants to be tasteful about the fact that he's sleeping with someone else's wife. I wasn't supposed to notice that. I was supposed to read, sign, and disappear quietly. Gary, she said, tapping the folder with one finger. We don't have to make this ugly. I looked up at her. I'm not making anything ugly, Diane. I'm reading. You've been reading for 10 minutes. It's a legal document. She exhaled through her nose like I'd said something stupid. It's straightforward. The house, the sailboat, and the truck. You keep the tools and the watch. Everyone walks away clean. I turned to page 3. The financial disclosure section was blank. Not incomplete. Blank. Like someone had decided the numbers weren't relevant to the conversation. Your lawyer put this together? I asked. Obviously. He forget page 8? Her eyes didn't move, but something behind them shifted. Just a flicker. The kind of micro-expression that takes years of watching people to catch. I caught it. There are 7 pages, she said. That's the whole document. I nodded like I believed her, flipped to the signature line, and signed. One long, smooth stroke with the Mont Blanc pen she'd given me on our 5th anniversary. Probably a knockoff, now that I thought about it. I set it down carefully, stood up, and straightened my jacket. She blinked. That's it? That's it. I pulled off my wedding ring and set it next to the house keys on the patio table. Not for drama. I just knew she'd come back out here to gloat, and I wanted her to find it waiting. She walked me to the front door with her arms crossed, wearing the smile of someone who's been rehearsing this moment for months. As I stepped out onto the driveway, I glanced up at the second floor, the bedroom window. There was a silhouette behind the glass. Tall, male. Not even trying to hide. Of course not. Why would he? As far as he knew, the house was already hers. You're going to regret not fighting for this, Diane said behind me. I kept walking. You might want to call your lawyer tomorrow morning, I said, not looking back. Early, she laughed. I heard the champagne flute clink against the doorframe as she leaned there watching me go. I didn't look back. I had somewhere to be, and the sunrise I was planning was going to be a lot more interesting than hers. Diane was on her second glass of champagne before 10 in the morning. That wasn't new. Her routine had drifted considerably over the past year, from green smoothies and sunrise yoga to poolside brunches with her friend Patrice, a woman who had a law degree she'd never used, and a talent for saying yes, absolutely, to everything Diane said regardless of how delusional it was. They were stretched out on the lounge chairs when Diane's phone rang. Martin Kessler, Esquire, her lawyer. She smirked at Patrice. Hold on. Let me hear him tell me how brilliantly I handled yesterday. She answered with a breezy confidence that would have been impressive under any other circumstances. Good morning, Martin. Guess what? I'm officially a homeowner. There was a pause. Not the comfortable kind. Vanessa, he used her middle name. He always did when something was wrong. Did he sign your copy of the file? She sat up straighter. Yes, I handed it to him myself. Your copy, Martin repeated, and the way he said it made the words sound like a trap. Where is it right now? On the kitchen counter, in the folder. Go look at it. Martin, I'm literally in the middle of... Go look at it right now. She rolled her eyes for Patrice's benefit and padded barefoot into the house, flipping her hair back like this was all a minor inconvenience. She dropped the folder on the marble island, opened it, and flipped straight to the signature page. There it was. Gary's signature. Bold, clean, exactly where it was supposed to be. It's signed, she said, putting him on speaker. Relax. Turn to the last page. This is the last page. It's 7 pages, Martin. Dead silence. What? She asked. Diane. His voice had dropped to something close to a whisper. His version had 8. She flipped through again. 1, 2, 3, 5. The signature on 7. No 8. There's no page 8, she said slowly. It ends at 7. His copy doesn't. She could hear him typing. Then he read aloud, flat and careful, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Clause 8. Transfer shall be considered null and void upon the grantor's substantiated claim of post-separation cohabitation, attempt to liquidate the property, or evidence of extramarital intent by the grantee within a 90-day window from date of execution. The kitchen went very quiet. What does that mean? She asked, though some part of her already knew. It means he baited you, Martin said. He handed you a document that looked like his version. You printed your own copy, handed it to him, and he signed it while slipping a clause past you that makes the whole thing void the moment you do exactly what you've already done. Diane set the folder down, picked it up, set it down again. You didn't notarize it, Martin continued, and now his voice had the weary cadence of a man counting other people's mistakes. You didn't have a neutral third party present. You didn't cross-reference copies. Why would I? I watched him sign it. You watched him sign his version, not yours. A pause. Diane, you walked into this. Patrice appeared in the doorway, still holding her mimosa, reading Diane's face like a weather forecast. You okay? You look kind of pale. Diane didn't answer her. Martin, can we just get the original back and... It's already been filed. His voice went flat. His team submitted a notarized scan with tracking metadata, video timestamp, and a clerk's affidavit. They moved before you even finished your champagne. She started pacing. He barely looked at the document. He flipped through it for like 2 minutes. He didn't need to read it. He wrote it. That stopped her cold. I checked the document properties, Martin said. It was created by a paralegal at Rolls and Given. That's a corporate litigation firm, Diane. Real estate, trust law, ironclad contracts. Not your boyfriend's family law operation. She went to the counter and gripped the edge. Then, like a slow-moving flood, it hit her. The Post. Last night poolside, she'd put up a boomerang video. Champagne flutes, bare shoulders. That caption she'd been workshopping for weeks. Finally free. Cheers to new chapters. Lakeview forever. She'd geotagged the property. And in the background, clearly visible, not Gary, was someone else entirely. Martin, she said quietly, I posted something last night. Silence. On Instagram. More silence. Longer this time. Describe it, he said. Champagne. The dock. Me and... She stopped. And someone who isn't Gary. Martin made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a groan. It was the sound a man makes when he realizes he's been hired to defend a position that has already been surrendered. Geotagged at the property. I always tag locations, she said, her voice going small. It boosts engagement. Patrice, still standing in the doorway, lowered her mimosa. Girl, is that the guy from the dock? Because that's cohabitation. It was one night. Your caption says finally. That implies he's been waiting. Diane stared at her phone. The post had 412 likes. Gary's name was in the viewed list. He had seen it within the first hour. Oh my God, she whispered. Martin's voice came back, quieter now, almost gentle. He saw it. He downloaded it. And unless I'm wrong, which I'm not, that video is currently sitting in a filing folder with a timestamp and a GPS pin. He paused. You started with a champagne flute and an Instagram filter, Diane. He finished it with a clause. Then he hung up. Patrice took a slow step backward toward the patio. Outside, a chair scraped against the deck. Inside, Diane stood alone, with a folder full of paper that was worth exactly nothing. She had walked into that patio like she was closing a deal. She'd walked out of it holding a rope she'd tied herself. The office at Langston and Associates smelled the way a good accountant's office should smell. Old leather, coffee that had been sitting too long, and the particular mustiness of filing cabinets that have never once been cleared out. Charles Langston had been my accountant since 1992. He was the kind of man who wore the same 3 ties on rotation, kept a notepad on his desk that he never wrote on, and remembered every number he'd ever seen. He didn't smile when I walked in. He nodded at the chair across from his desk and slid a black folder across to me before I'd even sat down. She went for the house, he said, not a question. Came to the patio with a file, I said, like she was the county sheriff. He opened the folder and turned a single page toward me. She's barking up the wrong title. I almost smiled. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The page was crisp and clean. Cumberland Trust Holdings, LLC, letterhead at the top. Beneath it, the legal designation I'd memorized years ago. Discretionary Beneficiary Trust, irrevocable until death or formal dissolution. Trustee Gary R. Connell. Created March 14th, 2015, 3 months before I ever met Diane. I never changed it, I said. Didn't need to. Charles leaned back. You made her comfortable. You didn't make her a co-owner. She was never interested in the details. She's about to be. He slid another document forward. We file this, it's a formal notification of intent to revoke occupancy rights for external parties. The minute it goes in, any claim she tries to make on that house turns to smoke. She was never named. She was never gifted equity. She has never paid a single property tax bill in her life. I looked at the trust clause. I remembered the night I'd set it up. 2 colleagues of mine had been wiped out in divorces that year. One of them lost a lake house his grandfather had built with his own hands. I remember sitting across from Charles and telling him I wasn't cynical, just careful. He'd told me there was no difference. I'd paid the extra retainer to keep the trust's ownership massed under a shell LLC. At the time, it felt like overkill. Now it felt like the most sensible thing I'd ever done. Ready? Charles asked, sliding a pen across the desk. I signed. One motion, same as on the patio. Charles immediately passed the scan to his assistant. This locks it in. Her lawyer will receive formal revocation by certified mail, and it'll be logged with the county by Monday. He folded his hands. She won't be able to sneeze on that porch without a legal warning attached to it. I looked out the window. A squirrel was jumping between 2 bare branches, completely indifferent to everything happening below it. I almost envied the thing. Do it, I said. I drove back to my apartment with the radio off. Didn't need noise. My head was already loud enough with everything lining up the way I'd planned it. 10 years I'd carried that easement around like a spare key I never needed. Now I was finally putting it in the lock. The apartment was cold when I got in. I hadn't bothered with the heat much since I'd moved out. Seemed wasteful for one person in 3 rooms. I dropped my jacket on the chair, opened the cabinet above the sink, and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a coffee mug. Not because I was celebrating, more because some nights call for something warm that doesn't ask anything of you. I sat at the table and looked at the copy of the easement I'd left lying there. Smoothed flat, corners weighted down by a salt shaker and a dead lighter. My name was right there at the bottom, clean block letters, same as the day I'd signed it. I ran my thumb across the county seal. Still sharp, still real. I thought about the afternoon we'd signed it. Her father had been almost giddy, slapping my back, pouring coffee, telling me I was a good man, a smart man, practically family. Her mother had squeezed my arm and called me a lifesaver. And I'd sat there at that table, drinking their coffee and believing, genuinely believing, that I'd done something that mattered, that it would mean something. Turns out it did mean something, just not what I thought at the time. I finished the bourbon, rinsed the mug, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I called Evan. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. My guy filed the transfer first thing, he said, before I even got a word out. It's in the system. County records updated as of this morning. And the gate? Goes up Friday. I've got a crew scheduled. A pause. You sure you want to move this fast? Why wouldn't I? He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Because once that gate goes up, there's no quiet version of this anymore. They're going to know something's wrong before they know what it is. That middle period, that confusion, it's going to be loud. I know. And you're good with that. I'm good with that. Another pause, longer this time, then, All right, Friday it is. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the parking lot. Two pigeons were fighting over a piece of bread near the dumpster. One of them kept giving up and coming back. I watched until the bigger one finally flew off with the whole piece, and the smaller one just stood there on the asphalt looking confused. I knew exactly how that felt. I'd been the smaller pigeon for years, not anymore. Friday came and went without a word from anyone on her side, which meant either they hadn't noticed yet or they had, and they were still trying to figure out what they were looking at. Either way, I wasn't worried. The gate was up, the legal transfer was filed, the clock was running. It was 3 days later that the first call came in. Not to me, but about me. A mutual friend named Dale Hutchins, a guy I'd known since our kids played Little League together, texted me around noon. Heard something weird. Carol's dad was at the feed supply on Route 9 this morning, raising hell about his road access. Said somebody sold the easement out from under him. Sounded pretty shook up. You know anything about that? I stared at the message for a long moment. Carol. That was her name to the outside world. Carol Whitfield, daughter of Raymond Whitfield, third-generation landowner, untouchable pillar of this county. To me, she'd been my wife for 11 years. Now she was just the woman who'd told me to move out while she was slicing an apple. I typed back, news to me. Dale sent a shrug emoji and dropped it. Good man, didn't push. But his message told me everything I needed to know. Raymond was already out in public about it, which meant he was rattled enough to stop thinking clearly. A man who's rattled stops being careful. And a man who stops being careful starts making mistakes. I gave it another 2 days. Then I drove past the property. Not down the access road. I had no reason to go near the gate, and I wasn't about to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me there. I just drove the county road that ran parallel to the back of their land. The one you could take if you didn't mind a longer route and a gravel shoulder that tried to eat your tires. From that angle, through a gap in the tree line, I could see the yard, the equipment lot. 2 flatbed trailers sitting idle, loaded with nothing. A truck parked at an odd angle near the barn like it had been abandoned in a hurry. No movement. No workers. The kind of stillness that isn't peaceful. The kind that means something has stopped that shouldn't have. I didn't slow down, just kept driving, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. It looked exactly the way I thought it would. The call from Carol came 4 days after that. Not a text, an actual phone call, which told me she was past the point of being casual about any of this. I let it ring through to voicemail, twice. On the third try, I picked up. You need to stop this. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the current running underneath it. She was furious, and she was scared, and she was trying very hard not to let me hear either one. Stop what? I said. Don't do that. Don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Carol, I moved out, like you told me to. I've been keeping to myself. You sold the easement. I let a beat pass. I transferred property that was legally mine to transfer. That road is our lifeline. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly. She caught it and pulled it back. Do you understand what you've done? We can't get deliveries in. We can't get product out. The buyers are pulling their contracts because they can't afford the toll fees. My father is... She stopped. Your father's what? Silence. Carol. He's at the bank, she said finally. And her voice had gone flat in a way that told me it cost her something to admit that. He's been at the bank 3 times this week. I didn't say anything to that. We can fix this, she said. And now the tone shifted. Softer, more deliberate. The voice she used when she wanted something. I'd heard it plenty of times over the years. It used to work on me. You and I can sit down and talk about this like adults. Whatever you need, whatever you want out of this situation, we can negotiate. We don't have to burn everything down. I didn't burn anything down, I said. I just stopped paying to keep it standing. Another silence, longer this time. That's really how you see it. That's really how it is. I heard her exhale, sharp and short, like she'd been holding her breath and couldn't anymore. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but not today. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. She'd come to bargain. That was the tell. If she thought she had real leverage, legal, financial, personal, she wouldn't have called to negotiate. She would have had her lawyer call mine. The fact that she dialed me herself, voice tight, trying to sound reasonable while clearly coming apart at the seams, told me everything about where they actually stood. They were out of moves. I picked up the phone again and opened my banking app. The wire from Evan was still sitting there, clean and untouched. I looked at the number for a moment, then closed the app and went to make coffee. Some things don't need to be celebrated. They just need to be finished. 2 weeks after the gate went up, the feed trucks stopped coming entirely. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No confrontation, no standoff. The companies just quietly rerouted their schedules. When the toll fees made a delivery unprofitable, they found other clients. That's how business works. Nobody owes you a losing proposition just because you've been doing business together for years. The livestock situation got bad fast after that. Without regular feed deliveries, the herd started dropping weight. A few of the hands quit when the paychecks started coming late. Word spread the way it does in a small county. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, like water finding its way through cracks in a foundation. I heard most of it secondhand. Dale would text me the occasional update, not maliciously, just the way people share local news. Raymond Whitfield's at the co-op again. Heard he's trying to get a consortium of local farmers to go in on a shared legal fund. That one made me almost smile. Raymond Whitfield, who'd spent 30 years telling people no outsider had a say in his operation, was now going hat in hand to the neighbors he'd looked down on for decades, asking them to help him fight a legal battle he couldn't afford on his own. The neighbors, from what I heard, were politely unhelpful. It turned out Raymond had burned enough bridges over the years that the goodwill wasn't there when he needed it. People remembered the time he'd blocked the county from widening the road that ran past 3 other properties because he didn't want the traffic. They remembered the water rights dispute he'd won by hiring a lawyer aggressive enough to make the other party's legal fees unsustainable. They remembered a dozen small moments of Raymond Whitfield being Raymond Whitfield, certain that his name and his land gave him a permanent advantage over everyone around him. Now he was learning that advantages aren't permanent. They're just borrowed time. I ran into Dale at the hardware store on a Wednesday morning. He was picking up replacement hinges for a barn door, and I was there for a new set of socket wrenches. We ended up in the same aisle, which in a town this size isn't really a coincidence. It's just Tuesday. "You look good," he said, which in Dale's language meant, "You look better than you did 6 months ago." "Sleeping better," I said. He nodded, pulling a cart of hinges off the hook and flipping it over to check the size. Heard Raymond had to let 2 of his full-time guys go. I didn't respond to that directly. Just picked up a wrench and checked the grip. Also heard Carol's been spending a lot of time at her parents' place, he added. Which is interesting given that the last I knew, you were the one who moved out. "Things shift," I said. Dale looked at me sideways. The look of a man who has known you long enough to read between every line you say, and most of the ones you don't. "You doing all right? Honestly?" I thought about it for a second. Really thought about it. "Yeah," I said, and actually, yeah, I am. He nodded, like that settled something. "Good. Because for a while there," he stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. You want to grab coffee after this?" We ended up at the diner on Maple, the one that's been there since before either of us was born, with the laminate countertops and the coffee that's always slightly too hot, but you drink it anyway. We sat in a booth by the window and talked about nothing important for a while. His barn renovation, my new apartment, whether the county was ever going to fix the pothole on Route 12 that had been there since the previous administration. Then Dale set down his mug and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Did you plan all of this from the beginning, or did it just happen?" I looked out the window at the street. A woman was walking a dog that was clearly walking her. An old man was reading a newspaper on a bench, which you don't see much anymore. "I kept the paperwork," I said finally. I always kept it. Didn't know exactly when I'd need it, but I kept it. Dale absorbed that. Smart. Or just careful. Same thing sometimes. He picked up his coffee again, then, after a moment, You know what you should do when this is all settled? Actually settled, I mean. When the dust is down. What's that? Meet somebody new. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Not right away, but eventually. You're not the kind of guy who does well alone long term. You need someone to talk to who isn't me. I laughed at that. A real one, not the polite kind. I appreciate the honesty. I mean it, though. My cousin went through something similar a few years back. Divorce, the whole mess. He was in bad shape for a while. Dale turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. Then somebody told him about this app, singletune.com, I think it's called. He said it was different from the usual stuff. You don't even see profiles right away. First, you go through this whole values assessment. Questions about what you actually believe in, what you've been through, what you want out of life. The matching is based on that, not on photos or how close somebody lives to you. Huh, I said. He said it was the first time in years he felt like somebody was actually listening to him. Even just the questions themselves made him think about things he hadn't thought about in a long time. Dale shrugged. I'm not saying run out and sign up tomorrow. I'm just saying, when you're ready. There are ways to do it that don't feel like standing in a meat market. I didn't say much to that, just filed it away. But it stayed with me longer than I expected. The second week of the following month, Evan called me with an update that I hadn't been expecting quite so soon. They reached out, he said. Raymond himself called the LLC number and asked to speak with whoever was in charge of the road situation. What did you tell him? I had my property manager take the call. Very professional, very pleasant. Told him that Redline Development was open to discussing long-term access agreements, but that the current toll structure would remain in place until a formal arrangement was negotiated and signed. How did he take that? Evan's voice had that dry amusement in it again. He did not take it well. There was a significant amount of language that I won't repeat, followed by a threat to involve his county commissioner. My property manager thanked him for his time and gave him the email address for our legal department. And then he called back 20 minutes later and asked what a long-term access agreement would look like. I sat with that for a moment. Raymond Whitfield calling back, asking what a deal would look like. The man who used to tell people no outsider had a say in his land. What did you tell him? I told him we'd have our attorney draft a proposal, which we will. It won't be cheap, and the terms will strongly favor us, but it'll be legal, and it'll be binding. He'll sign it eventually because he doesn't have a choice. Evan paused. You want to know the numbers? Not particularly. He laughed, surprised, I think. You really don't care about the money, do you? I care about the money, I said. I just don't need to hear the specifics right now. Fair enough. A beat. For what it's worth, I've done a lot of deals like this. Acquisitions, easements, access disputes. Most of the time, the person on your side of the table is angry the whole way through. You're the calmest I've ever dealt with. I've had time to process, I said. Clearly. He sounded almost impressed. I'll send you the proposed terms when they're drafted. You don't have to do anything with them. You're not a party to the negotiation anymore. But I figured you'd want to see it. I would, I said. Thanks, Evan. Don't thank me. You handed me a gold mine and let me keep most of it. I should be thanking you. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a while. The heat had finally kicked in. I'd broken down and called the building manager about the thermostat, and he'd actually fixed it, which was a small miracle. The place felt more like somewhere a person lived now. I'd put up a few things on the walls. Found a decent lamp at the thrift store on 5th. Bought a coffee maker that wasn't embarrassing. It wasn't much. But it was mine. Every inch of it. Mine. I thought about what Dale had said at the diner, about his cousin and the app, and the questions that made you think about things you hadn't thought about in a long time. I'd been turning that over in my head more than I wanted to admit. Not because I was ready for anything, I wasn't, not really. But because the idea of someone asking me what I actually believed in, what I'd been through, what I wanted from the rest of my life, that idea had a pull to it that I couldn't quite shake. I'd spent 11 years in a marriage where nobody asked me those questions. Or if they did, they stopped listening to the answers somewhere around year 4. I'd gotten so used to not being asked that I'd stopped asking myself, what did I believe in? What did I want? I opened my laptop and typed singletune.com into the browser. Didn't sign up, didn't even click past the landing page. Just read what was there for a few minutes, then closed it. But I left the tab open. That night, I made myself a decent dinner for the first time in weeks. Nothing elaborate, just a pork chop and some roasted potatoes. The kind of meal that takes 20 minutes but feels like an actual decision rather than just eating because your body requires it. I ate at the table instead of standing over the sink. I put on some music. I let the evening be quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than just empty. It was a small thing, but small things add up. 3 days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It took me a moment to place the name at the bottom of the message. It was Greta Paulson, a woman I'd known vaguely years ago before Carol, back when I was in my early 30s, and the world felt like it still had a lot of open road ahead of it. We'd had a few mutual friends, crossed paths at a handful of parties. Nothing had ever come of it. Life went sideways for both of us in different directions. Dale gave me your number, the text read. Hope that's okay. He said you might be going through something similar to what I went through last year. If you ever want to talk, no pressure. I know how weird it is when everything changes at once. I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed back, it's okay that he gave it to you, and yeah, it's been a year. She replied almost immediately, do you want to get coffee sometime? Totally low-key. I'm not trying to make it weird. I almost said no out of reflex. The part of me that had been operating in pure self-protective mode for the past several months wanted to say no, keep the perimeter clear, don't let anyone new into the equation until everything is fully resolved. But then I thought about standing at that kitchen window watching the parking lot, about the smaller pigeon on the asphalt, just standing there. Sure, I typed. When works for you? We met on a Saturday morning at a place she suggested. Not the diner where I'd been with Dale, a different spot, quieter, with better coffee and mismatched chairs that somehow worked. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug, and she looked up when I walked in with the kind of expression that said she'd been wondering whether I'd actually show up. I had wondered the same thing myself, right up until I pulled into the parking lot. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. We talked for 2.5 hours. Not about Carol, not about the easement, not about any of the specific wreckage of the past year. We talked about the kind of things you talk about when you're trying to figure out who somebody is, where they grew up, what they do, what they think about when they're not thinking about anything in particular. She'd been through a divorce herself 18 months ago, and she talked about it with the kind of honest, unflinching clarity that you only get from someone who's actually processed it rather than just survived it. At some point, she said, a friend of mine told me about this app, singletune.com. I actually signed up for it a few months ago. I've heard of it, I said. It's different from what I expected. Before you see anyone's profile, you go through this whole questionnaire about your values, what you believe in, what you've been through. It's almost more like therapy than dating. She smiled at that. I'm not saying that as a criticism. It was actually kind of clarifying. Some of the questions made me realize things about what I actually wanted that I hadn't admitted to myself yet. Did you meet anyone through it? A couple of people, nothing serious yet. But the conversations were real, like actually real. Not the usual small talk you do when you're just trying to figure out if someone is a complete disaster. She looked at me sideways. You should try it when you're ready. Not now necessarily, but when you are. Somebody else told me the same thing recently, I said. Smart people travel in packs, she said. I laughed. Another real one. When we finally stood up to leave, she said, this was good. I wasn't sure it was going to be, but it was. Same, I said. And I meant it. Walking back to my truck, I noticed the air had that particular quality it gets in late fall. Cold and clean. The kind that makes everything feel slightly more awake than usual. I sat in the cab for a minute before starting the engine, not thinking about anything specific. Just sitting. The last few months had been the hardest stretch I could remember in a long time. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, the paperwork, the gate, the phone calls, the late nights at the kitchen table with bourbon and old documents, something had shifted. Not just outside, in the situation with Carol and Raymond and the road. Inside, too. I'd stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was worth something. I'd stopped needing the argument to go my way. For me to know I was right. I'd stopped measuring myself by what she thought of me, which, it turned out, was the thing that had been making me the smallest. That took longer to figure out than the easement. A week after that Saturday coffee, Evan sent me the proposed terms of the long-term access agreement. I read through it once, slowly, and then set it aside. The numbers were significant. A recurring annual fee that would run for the next 20 years, with adjustment clauses that would keep pace with inflation. Raymond would be paying for access to that road for the rest of his working life. The farm would survive, technically, but it would never again be the untouchable empire he'd built his identity around. He'd spend the next 2 decades writing a check to a corporation that had bought the road from his son-in-law for less than the cost of a used pickup truck. Every year, like clockwork. I didn't feel the need to announce that to anyone. It wasn't the kind of thing you broadcast. It was the kind of thing you know, quietly, and carry with you in a way that doesn't weigh anything at all. The last thing I heard about Carol directly came from Dale about a month later. She'd moved in with her parents. Not temporarily. She'd given up the house, which meant she'd also given up the leverage she thought she had over me in the divorce proceedings. Her lawyer had apparently advised against it, but she'd done it anyway, which told me something about where her head was. She wasn't thinking strategically anymore. She was just trying to hold her family together with both hands while it slid through her fingers. I didn't feel sorry for her. I'd used up all of that a long time ago. But I didn't feel the need to twist the knife either. It was done. The whole thing was done. The gate was up, the agreement was signed, the money was in the account, and somewhere in a county records office. A document with my name on it had been replaced by one with Evans, and that was the last thread connecting me to any of it. I closed the laptop, put on my jacket, and went for a walk. It was a cold evening, the kind where your breath comes out in small clouds and your hands want to be in your pockets. I walked down my street, past the hardware store, past the diner, past the park where the benches had been empty for weeks, because nobody sits outside in November unless they have a reason to. I didn't have a reason. I just walked anyway. There's something that happens when you finally stop carrying something heavy. Not a dramatic moment, no big release, no tears. It's quieter than that. It's more like noticing one afternoon that your shoulders aren't up around your ears anymore. That you went a whole day without replaying a conversation in your head. That you ate dinner at the table and listened to music and didn't think about any of it, not once, until you were already in bed. That's what it felt like. I turned the corner back toward my building, hands in my pockets, breath clouding in front of me. The streetlights had come on while I was walking, that particular amber color that makes everything look a little warmer than it actually is. I thought about the tab I'd left open on my laptop, the questions it was asking. What do you believe in? What have you been through? What do you want from the rest of your life? I thought I might actually know the answers now, not all of them, but enough to start.